Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hi there, and welcome to episode 79 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another story. Before we jump into today's case, a few quick reminders. First, if you haven't, please take a second to rate, review, subscribe, or follow, whichever your app requires, so that you can get the newest episodes every Monday. If you have already, thank you so very much. Reviewing and subscribing, it is the best way to help out the podcast, and I'm so very thankful for you guys. I wouldn't be doing this if you guys weren't here to listen and support me. Next, if you are enjoying TheKillFile and you're looking for some more content, we now have the hidden files out over on Patreon. By the time this episode comes out, it might actually be on Spotify as well. Things that are true crime adjacent, like natural disasters, plane crashes, and assassinations. I dive into other stories that are interesting. Next, check out the website at TheKillFile.com, where you can find a place to suggest a case that you want me to cover, or you can find the merch site for some fun true crime merch that also supports TheKillFile and helps spread the word. The hoodies and the sweatshirts are my personal favorite. I wear mine constantly. Lastly, take a second to follow TheKillFile on any social media platform that you use. We are on Blue Sky, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, where you'll get posts, pictures, and if you can, share a post or two. It helps spread the word about TheKillFile. My ultimate goal is to be able to get a little help with the creation of the podcast episodes so that I can put out even more content each week, maybe like mini episodes or something of that nature, but I need to bring in someone to help me first. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today, we are going to talk about a prolific Chinese serial killer named Yang Xinhai. Trigger warnings for today are going to be rape, rape of a minor, murder, murder of a minor, family annihilation, necrophilia, and brutality. Yeah, this one is rough. Here we go. Today's story is going to take us all the way over to Henan, China in the years between 2000 and 2003. According to an AI overview of the area during this time, Henan is a lesser developed area in China, with many families that inhabited the area to be poverty-stricken in rural areas. Many people who lived in places like this would leave in search of a better life, so they would head to the more industrious areas in eastern China in search of work, and sadly, many people were forced to leave their own children with their parents, who were often elderly. People from the Henan area are known to have often been treated with discrimination. There's also a large stereotype for people who come from here for other people that are living in China. They are often seen as con people or scamming type people without any manners and sort of rough around the edges or unrefined because of the area that they came from. It's widely known throughout China that the Henan area was an area largely known for its economic hardships. This area was reliant upon the natural resources like aluminum and coal. Henan being a province of China, a province being similar to a state, with Jiangzhou being the capital. Henan was unfortunately the central point of a major HIV or AIDS crisis, which would end up being the result of something that I have never heard of before. I guess it was a thing back in the 90s, particularly in this area, that there was some blood and plasma schemes that unfortunately would end up with the HIV virus infecting thousands of people, mostly farmers and the like. In the 80s, there was a shift made that would help with collecting the demand for so much blood needed, and they would encourage people in the areas to donate and to receive money for doing it. The problem was that these places did not practice safe collections when it came to the blood or the plasma. Once the blood was extracted from multiple donors, the blood would be pooled. Then the plasma would be taken out and the blood put back in. This unsafe practice would mean that just one HIV-positive donation would infect the entire pool of donors, and to top it off, needles and the bags themselves were being used were not properly sterilized. As you can imagine, the numbers of people infected with HIV skyrocketed in the area. The area of Henan was not only going through the HIV epidemic, but there were problems with the region's infrastructure and the economy. The capital, Jiangzhou, was developing into a huge transportation hub because of the expanding railways. Unfortunately, the area would suffer because there weren't a lot of higher education opportunities or resources as far as education went. It's sad because it almost seemed like the people who lived there, they couldn't make their way out and they were stuck. This brings us to the serial killer that we came here to talk about. Let's learn a little bit about him. Young Xinhai was born on July 17, 1968, to an extremely poor family with parents Junjuan and Xinyun, with their family all living in the Hunan area. He was the youngest of 4 children, although some sources said 6, and it was said that the family did not have many resources. One source would say that they were so poor that they hardly had any furniture in their home, and they wouldn't even use lights in the house unless they had guests over. In school, Yang was known to be a smart child, but was described as very withdrawn. Although Yang was bright when it came to his academics, he would end up dropping out of school at the age of 17 in 1985, and this is also when he would decide that he wanted to leave home and never return. He decided instead that he would travel around China in search of work as a laborer of sorts. Unclear whether this was a good decision or not. There's not enough known about his family life except for the fact that they were very poor. Yang would be arrested just a few years after venturing out on his own for theft and sentenced to a labor camp. So I have heard of the word labor camp, obviously, before, but I didn't exactly know what that means or what they actually do there. So I was curious, and I did a little research for those of us who don't know. Turns out that these labor camps were, instead of prisons, places that criminals were sent to as a part of the Chinese Criminal Justice Center, and this was established by Mao Zedong, which I guess was kind of modeled after the Gulag in the Soviet Union. So they would use these camps to try and reform their prisoners with a term of their sentence through grueling manual labor, political education, and what some sources called brainwashing. These labor camps were also for the people who didn't necessarily fall in line when it came to the political standards, and they would often send what they called political prisoners to these camps as well. Eventually, in 1994, these camps were alleged to have been replaced with prisons. However, the newer systems, called Liao Chiao, was basically the exact same thing with the manual labor, just in differently named facilities. Then, in 2013, these Liao Chiao were also officially abolished, I guess because of the pressure that was being put on the Chinese government by domestic and international entities. Unfortunately, there are human rights groups who to this day report that they've just been replaced with other forms of quote-unquote illegal detention places. The names of these places are known to be called drug rehab centers, black jails, or something called vocational education classes, where whatever form of detention they deem necessary is still taking place. The, quote, modern internment camps, as it were, are usually targeted towards minorities, where the human rights organizations, as well as people who have been detained in these training centers or vocational education places, report back that they are still forced labor camps where they force people's cultures to be erased, they force political beliefs on the prisoners, and they are forced into different industry labors, and they're even tortured. Let this be a lesson to us all. Do not break the law or get your ass in trouble in China. Holy shit. There's an estimated 1 million people in these camps just over the last 7 years alone. I guess they don't fuck around over there. Okay, so Yang was in one of these camps in 1988 and then again in 1991, both for theft. Then he would escalate his crimes, unfortunately, to rape. In 1996, Yang would be arrested for an attempted rape where the woman he attacked fought back like the badass that she is, and she actually bit a chunk of Yang's tongue and was able to escape. For this, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but only having served 3 years, he was released in 1999. Big mistake. This is when he would start his killing spree that would escalate, with each murder being more brutal than the last. These murders would end up with the infamy of what locals called him the Monster Killer. Okay, I'm going to throw out right now that there are many, many Chinese names of villages or people in this case, and I'm going to do my best, but I'm learning that the letters that we have do not have the same sound when they are used in Chinese. But for time's sake, I just can't look up every single one, which means I'm going to absolutely butcher them, not even making the right sound with the letters. And for that, I am truly sorry. I'm going to do my best. The first murder that Yang would commit was in a village called Gyozhuang, and this was on September 19th in the year 2000. An elderly man, 70-year-old Yang Pimen, and his wife Shan Langying were in their home on this evening located in a rural part of their village. Yang would come into their home without an official weapon, but instead he had just picked up a brick outside of the home and bashed both Shan and Yang in their heads until they were both dead. He then robbed them of anything that he thought could be valuable, and he fled into the darkness. In this case, as in many, neighbors are the ones who would end up finding their neighbors dead or friends deceased. And in this case, after the older couple was found, people were initially thinking the suspect to be a man called Jan Deli. I guess he was from the village, and he had recently gotten into a fight with the couple over what one source would say was cigarette money. Everyone in the local area pointed to him because they had all known about the fight. Jan eventually confessed to the murder, but of course we know now he was not the killer. He actually had confessed to the murders under duress. Only a few weeks after the first pair of murders, Jan was ready to feel that feeling again. Being a drifter and choosing the life of crime instead of working for money, Jan would travel all over, making it harder to track his murderous actions. On October 1st, 2000, Yang had been in a place called Chengshu Xiaoying Village, where he would enter the home of a 60-year-old woman named Shi Junjing, where her 2 grandchildren, a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old, were both spending the night with their grandmother. Yang would unfortunately kill all 3 of them after entering the home. When their bodies were found, she was found with a hole in her head from what was said to be an iron rod, and she was beaten severely. One of the resources I used for this case was called the MysteryAbyss on YouTube, which would say that when it came to this case, she was beaten so badly that her teeth were found exposed from her actual jaw being split open by her horrific beating. Brace yourself, the next little bit is awful. One of the grandchildren, a boy, was found stabbed and strangled, and the granddaughter was found naked with a hole in her head. They would also find signs of sexual assault on the granddaughter, where it was thought that the rape could have taken place after the young girl was already dead. So, as I was learning about the victims, I couldn't help but wonder if they were just crimes of opportunity, like, did he just pick a house at random and go in and plan on killing anyone and everyone he found inside, or did he watch them first? The authorities believe that when it came to Shi's house with her grandchildren, that Yang possibly seen the granddaughter earlier in the day, followed her home, and then planned to attack the household later in the evening, where he wouldn't be spotted. Other sources, or at least other murders, were thought to have been random, where he would actually literally just pick a house, enter, and kill anyone he found inside, which is absolutely terrifying. Imagine some psychopath just picking houses at random and killing everyone as they slept, knowing that he could be in any part of any of the provinces. Holy shit. Because Yang was a drifter, another local man was pinpointed for the crime, and although he never confessed, the village thought it was him for years to come. It would be later found out that Yang would allegedly stalk his victims before killing some of them. In fact, some would say that he would lie in wait, watching them for days, waiting for the right time to attack. One of the things that helped Yang to get away with his crimes, even though he was a drifter and not from the areas where he killed, was also the fact that he would wear different clothing each time that he killed, and he was known to have worn shoes 2 sizes too big so that if he did leave any prints behind, they wouldn't be linked to him. He was clever, unfortunately, which would aid in his ability to kill people without being figured out or caught. The next set of murders would take place on August 15th, 2001, so almost an entire year from the last ones, or so at leist we think. In the village of Fengqilao, there was a 42-year-old woman named Zhui Yongxin, and next to her was her daughter, Lu Feifei, who at the time was 14 years old, and her son, who was 11, named Lu Jitong. That evening, Yang would enter their home with what was said to be a hammer and sadly beat the family to death. Afterwards, raping the most likely deceased body of Lu Feifei, and then robbing the family afterwards. The grandmother of the family would sadly be the ones who find her family slaughtered inside their home. The police would arrive and begin their search of the killer, taking DNA from local men, trying to find their man. In September of 2001, Yang would be in a place called Kanglu Township, where he would enter the home of Bai Guingying and Zhen Oingang. He would bludgeon the pair to death with another hammer. He would then flee the area in search of a new location and new victims. Sources would say that during Yang's downtime, when he wasn't murdering and raping people, that he would enjoy writing, filling up notebooks with stories about a fake place called Plato Flats. His stories often revolved around stories of murders. Sometimes he would write skeleton notes about horror movies, weird and scary short stories, and also some weird symbols, too, I guess. I wonder what it was like to find that notebook. I feel like that would absolutely freak my shit. December of 2001, Yang would strike again while he was in Pingdingxian, where he would enter into a home at night and kill 2 people as they were asleep inside. The victims were Xiaogao and Xinhai, and after the murders, he then, like the asshole he was, would rob the home after the pair were dead, and then, just like the Golden State Killer, he would take off on a bicycle. This is how the pattern would go for the bigger part of Yang's killing spree, and because he was careful to change his clothes and shoes often, he was hard to track or find. Even in his own family, they would lose touch with him, and they would often be left wondering where he was living or working or if he was even still alive. This would allow him to have a victim count of at least 67 people after everything was said and done. Yang would enter people's homes late at night, often while they were asleep, where he would use any weapons such as an axe, a knife, a hammer, a shovel, or even a meat cleaver to stab and bludgeon his victims to death. It was stated in many sources that these crime scenes were incredibly brutal, often with victims' heads being beaten in or caved in from such horrific force being used. Yang would then usually leave behind the weapon that he used. He didn't linger long after the crimes, and he would usually dispose of the clothing that he was wearing before anyone could see him. Some sources said that he was clever enough to pull his socks over his shoes so that no prints could be left behind in blood or any other ways after the murders. If he were to take a weapon with him, he either got rid of it or he would bury it quickly. Eventually, with so many murders in the areas not being able to be linked to anyone of the locals or anyone in the villages, they started to believe that they had some sort of boogeyman. Some even referred to him as the Hammer Man. For most of the time, though, the authorities weren't putting any of the crimes together. The boogeyman of sorts was thought of by locals, not necessarily by the police. In fact, the reason that he got away with his crimes for so long was because of the way Yang operated. These kinds of drifter criminals with no rhyme or reason and with no connection to the victims, they're the hardest to catch because there's nothing to pinpoint who they are or where they will pop up next. It's almost as if you need sheer luck in figuring out who these killers are, at least back in this time frame. I feel like now, in our day and age, this bicycling fuck would be seen on like 100 different Ring cameras coming and going from any home, where at the time of the place that he was murdering, no one even really saw anyone entering or leaving the homes. Okay, so one thing that I learned in this case is that it is not common practice for media in China to report on ongoing cases. In fact, they normally don't report on anything until the case is solved. Did you guys know that? What the fuck? That's not only terrifying, knowing that horrific things could be happening and you have no fucking clue, like a damn sitting duck, but also, in my opinion, they are missing out on huge opportunities for the public to help in so many cases. It happens here all the time. Think about how many cases we have that are solved by a tip or someone spotting the killer, like the Night Stalker, which, by the way, is the absolute best ending to a horrific story. It is the public takedown of that son of a bitch that is just pure public justice. But how many times are news stories spread here through social media or news broadcasts, and it keeps the rest of us on our toes and on the lookout? Oh my God, I can't believe that they don't report like that. In fact, I was reading that the government is strict in their control of flow of the information over there. I guess the information has to align with whichever narrative is desired, and there is an overload, some would say, of censorship. In my research, I read that journalists and reporters over there usually censor themselves just to avoid getting in trouble. Because if they're not backed by whoever they need to be, they can be punished. I can't imagine living in a world without freedom of speech or the press. That would be very scary. And the level of control is absolutely insane to me. So without the media being able to report on these cases, it was kind of hard to link them together, and the public had no idea that Yang was out there murdering people. This would lead to Yang being able to get away with so many more murders, and in the beginning part of 2002, Yang would escalate his crimes even further. On January 6th, 2002, in Saiping County, and this is in Hunan, Yang would enter a home and kill a family of 5, including the mother, who he then raped after she was dead. Only a couple of weeks later, on January 27th, 2002, Yang would strike again in Tongsu County, and this was in Kaifeng. He, this time, killed a family of 3, and the mother was again raped after her death. The mother was only 32 years old. On June 30th, 2002, Yang would kill 4 people in a home late at night, raped a woman after she was deceased after just having slaughtered whoever was in the home, men, women, or children. The same would happen to a family just the next month on July 28th in Dengzhou City, where 4 people were again murdered, and this time there was reported 2 rapes. During these attacks, Yang would use an iron hammer for many of the blows to the skulls of his victims, and leaving a bloody, terrifying crime scene each time. On October 22, 2002, in a village called Xinhai, a farmer named Chunhei lived in a home with his daughter Fang Junli, who was just 6 years old. Sadly, Yang struck again, killing them both in their sleep, and afterwards, he would attack Feng Junli's mother, Wu Qinghua, who sickeningly was pregnant at the time. However, the mother would survive. There was only a handful of people that are said to have been lucky enough to survive these brutal and gruesome attacks by the monster killer, and Wu Qinghua was one of them. However, she would have severe damage done to her head and sadly would suffer a miscarriage from the attack. Also, I don't know if I would call it lucky that she survived after her husband and her 6-year-old daughter were killed, along with her unborn child. Fuck, it is so awful. After this murder, the authorities in the area were able to find fingerprints and a palm print that, of course, didn't match any of the men in the local village that the authorities would look at. After the attack in October, this is when Yang would be seen escalating rapidly as the gap of time between the murders and attacks was closing. This time, having only waited 2 weeks, Yang would strike again in a place called Gaoli Village on November 8, 2002. The Sun family lived in a home in the village where Yang would successfully murder 4 of the family members, and the 5th, after having been savagely beaten, somehow survived the attack. Within just a week, this time, Yang would attack 2 people in the Luzuang village, one being a woman, 65-year-old, named Zhang Weihua, and her granddaughter named Lui Huang, who was just 14 years old at the time. He would bludgeon them both to death and again rape the deceased body of Lui Huang. Yang would attack again just 3 days later, killing 2 people in the Xinhua village. After these attacks, it became a little more clear to the authorities that these weren't isolated attacks that were being committed, but by communicating information with each other, different providences were able to see the patterns of random attacks of violence, and the crime scenes left behind were almost always identical. When the task force of sorts was started to try and hunt what they now believe to be a serial killer, they were able to do their own suspect profile, and after gathering information, they would say they believed the man responsible lived the lifestyle of a drifter, seeing as he hit so many places in a short amount of time. They also predicted him to be between the ages of 25 and 40 with a criminal record of robbery, maybe burglary, and they also believed that he had been caught for sexual assault in his past. They nailed the profile when it came to his background, most likely because those are all the things that are obvious from the crime scenes. He raped the women, slaughtered all of the people, and then he robs them. However, it was said that when he robs them, he didn't take particular items, maybe so that they couldn't be traced back to him. That's just my conjecture, though. Yang was, as mentioned, pretty careful with forensic DNA or material being left behind. He really wanted to cover his tracks. Besides the changing of clothing each time and the shoes that were too big with the socks pulled over to avoid footprints, Yang would also sometimes use gloves as to not leave fingerprints, and some sources would say that although he was raping the women, he was careful to try not to ejaculate inside of them because he didn't want to leave DNA. Instead, it was noted that he would ejaculate into some sort of cloth to avoid detection, which kind of made me wonder how they knew that so many victims were raped, especially knowing that it was post-mortem. I don't know if it was maybe just the sheer brutality of the attacks or how they were left, maybe naked, or maybe even during the autopsies they could tell. I was just curious. I was surprised to find out that he didn't leave semen behind in most of his attacks, but then I also thought that pre-ejaculation fluids can sometimes contain sperm, right? So I wonder if he thought of that. Also, I would think that that fluid would definitely contain DNA. Of course, Yang wasn't able to be perfect in covering his tracks. He would leave the occasional clue behind, and of course, sometimes that would be DNA or a fingerprint. This was what the authorities were hoping would lead to their big break in the case in finding this monster who was responsible for so many deaths and so much carnage. Sources would say that the authorities trying to find a match by fingerprints would take over 30,000 fingerprint cards from people who used to be in prison and DNA samples from men who had been released from the labor camps that we had talked about. No matches, though. December 1st, 2002, Yang would enter a farmhouse that was located in Yanwan village, where he would murder a mother and father in their home. Luckily, although their daughter was attacked, she somehow survived. The next attack is one that is widely spoken about when it comes to young Xinhai. It's like one of the murders that he's known for, maybe because there's more information on this one, as some of the other murders I could only find like simply a date. Sometimes not even a name until you dig way further. Some of the information was very hard to find. Only 5 days after his last attack would come another in Luzhuang village. There was a family that was getting ready to move to a new home, the Louis family. Sadly, their dreams of that would be cut short after their encounter with Yang. He would sneak into their home at night with his iron hammer. He would kill the father, Louis Jiangwei, and his wife, their daughter, their young son, and even Jiangwei's mother. There was one survivor of the night of horror that succumbed to the Louis family, and that was the 68-year-old grandfather to the children and father of Jiangwei, a man named Louis Zhangyuan. Zhangyuan had actually been sleeping at the unfinished home that the family was supposed to move into. Their big move was supposed to be on December 9th, but sadly, Yang came along on December 6th, leaving bodies in his wake. It would be Zhangyuan who would find his family, having to horrifically see his family bludgeoned to death, in which he later recanted in a gut-wrenching manner when he would come across his own wife after seeing his son, daughter-in-law, grandson, and granddaughter all deceased in horrifying ways. His wife was still alive at the moment. Zhangyuan would say that when he got to her side, she was not able to speak, but she was able to slowly blink her eyes. She was rushed to the hospital where she would live an additional 10 days before ultimately succumbing to her injuries and passing away. During his confessions of the murder, Yang would say after he butchered this family that he buried the murder weapon, a hammer, in a local cemetery and then threw his clothing, which he claimed were full of blood, into a nearby river. He then claimed to have traveled to Luohe on foot, which would take actually a few hours to get to. December 13th, 2002 was the next attack where Yang would murder 2 people from the Sijia village. A man named Si Desheng, his wife named Zhu Aiying, and sadly their son Si Xiyang had all been killed in their home during the night. Yang only waited 2 days after this attack for the next that would come in the area of the Anhui province, where Yang would bludgeon to death a man named Li Xinde and his 2 kids, a 13-year-old daughter who had sadly been raped post-mortem, and his 9-year-old son who had been found with some dirt and mud on one of his hands. The authorities would presume that the son had made a break for it and tried to get out before Yang would either drag or wrestle him back into the home. Sadly, Han Fangying was the grandmother to the children, was the one to find her family in this horrific state after not hearing from them for 2 days. All I could think as I'm looking into these murders and reading whatever I could find is wondering what the victims might have been feeling or thinking as these butcherings are taking place. Like, it's one thing to think of someone who is sleeping, and as horrific as it is killed in their sleep. Even in this disturbing manner of bludgeoning, I would hope that these people didn't live long or feel pain. You would hope, but that's just a thought, right? We have no idea what these people went through. Like, did they hear their loved ones screaming, knowing they were next? Did it just happen silently in their sleep, so the only sounds were made by the hammer or axe blows? I have so many questions. I want to know what happened to these poor people. Also, how horrific for the family members to find them like this and have that image seared into their brains as the last memory of their family. At the end of 2002, Yang had killed around 33 people in their homes at night in one of the worst ways possible. The very next year, the monster would finally be caught, but not until after having killed even more people. On February 5th, 2003, in Kuzhuang Township, Yang would enter the home of where 4 people were most likely asleep. Yang would kill 3 people, rape a woman, and luckily for the 4th person, they would survive. The next attack came less than 2 weeks later on February 18th when Yang would murder 4 people in the Shiying Township, and during his attack, he was horribly able to rape 2 victims. As the attacks in 2003 were occurring, although the press wasn't able to put anything out in the news about what was going on, the police had actually handed out flyers about this serial killer for people to be on the lookout. Sources would also say that neighborhoods would organize watches at night to try and keep the people of their village or township safe. It was widely talked about how they had some type of unhinged serial killer attacking at night and hardly leaving anything behind to even show that he was there, except for the appalling crime scenes. Yang's next murders would occur on March 23, 2003, in Shenguan, where he would kill 4 people and again rape a woman. This attack, along with the one before, were a little different than the past murders in the way of location. Before, Yang would choose very rural locations, and this attack and the one in Xiaying were both closer to the main portion of the town or village. The authorities were unsure if this was the killer's way of being more brazen and arrogant, that he would never be caught, or if this was him changing up his pattern. During this time is when Yang would confess that because the task force was out hunting him, canvassing neighborhoods, and trying to warn people while they were out there working, he was avoiding capture at all costs. This included him sleeping in fields to avoid detection and even having to steal food just to be able to eat. He was caught by the people that he was stealing from. They would just kind of get rid of him, having no idea who they had just encountered. Yang would confess that although the people making him leave after stealing food severely angered him, he never hurt any of them. I'm thinking that this was out of sheer concern for himself being caught, and not because he cared in the least. The last 3 home attacks were similar to the rest. On April 2nd, Yang would be in Sanlijui village. Yang would climb up a wall and enter the home of a couple that had gotten married not long before. Li Yongying and wife Chen Mangwin were in their quote-unquote honeymoon phase of their marriage, having gotten married just 3 months earlier. Sadly, Chen was also 3 months pregnant at the time when Yang would attack, killing them both. Yang's last 2 attacks before he was caught would both come in August, meaning from April to August there was nothing. Now, Yang did confess to his 67 murders, so does that mean he really did take a break for a while, or is he full of shit and there's more out there? If he did stop, why? And what was he doing? Did he think he could just walk away, or did the urge suddenly stop? On August 5th, 2003, sources say that Yang stole an axe from a neighbor in the Ladao village and took it into a home where he would sadly kill 3 members of a family. Sun Chengzhuang, wife Ji Shu, and sadly the couple's 15-year-old daughter, Sun Yuan. When Yang left the home, he would leave the axe he used at their front door and would throw the gloves that he was wearing next to the axe. Yang's last attack would come just 3 days later on August 8th when he would be in the Diaoliangcheng village where he would attack a family of 5. The Wei family consisting of married couple Wei Sheyangzang and wife Fan Yuhua and their 3 children, Yugi, Yuhui, and Yubin. As the task force had started handing out flyers and warning people, leads were starting to come in. The authorities would track down many of the leads, but unfortunately, they didn't lead them to Xinhai. However, as they were all sharing all of their information about the massacres across several of the provinces now, they were still searching for a suspect that had specific things in his background or certain charges, and finally, Yang would come across as a potential suspect. While they were out following their leads, they would speak to Yang's family. His father, Zhong Shuang, told the police that he had actually not been home in a very long time, and it was at this time that they would take DNA from Zhong Shuang to compare it to the only trace samples that they had found at the various crime scenes, hoping for any help. Unfortunately, the DNA came back inconclusive, meaning Yang couldn't be ruled out, but also was not confirmed to be their killer. The task force at the time had set up what they called checkpoints, trying to find this drifter serial killer, but Yang was usually able to avoid them. This is why he slept in fields, and he would move between villages carefully, avoiding detection. I had to look up what these checkpoints would entail out of curiosity, and from what I could find, they would usually verify a person when they were stopped at the checkpoints' identity, search them physically, and detain them if needed to even interrogate them, and gain as much information as they could for their investigations. However, these tactics are not what would catch the monster killer. November 3rd, 2003, Yang was in Hebei and would be caught in the most unusual way. I guess in this area, they would do what they called routine searches or sweeps of the entertainment venues, where the authorities would be looking for smaller crimes like illegal gambling or theft, but what they would find would instead have them stumble across the man who was wanted for being the most prolific Chinese serial killer that the country had seen in their lifetime. As the authorities had come upon Yang Xinhai in what was said to be a nightclub, they felt that he was acting extremely suspicious. Now, I'm not exactly sure what he was doing or not doing to act suspicious, but sources say he didn't have any identification on him and he seemed to almost be trying to avoid the police. After the authorities brought him in for questioning, they noticed Yang seemed arrogant and confident that they had no idea who he was. Of course, they already had his name on the list of possible suspects, so it could have come as a surprise when they took his DNA to compare it to the crime scenes. And boom, they had a match. Their killer. They were looking into the face of the man who had traveled around the country, murdering people, sometimes entire families, and raping women after they were dead, as he pleased. One source would say that when Yang was confronted with the evidence that his DNA matched some of the crime scenes, he said, quote, "If there's evidence, I'll admit it. If not, don't try and scare me," end quote. Which, that in itself is quite telling. You're basically saying that if they have enough evidence on you, you'll tell them everything. Like, you're telling them that you did something, or there wouldn't be anything to tell, right? Eventually, Yang would confess to the murders in which he had committed, and thankfully so, because it turns out that some of the killings that he had confessed to the authorities, they had no idea that they were Yang, and other people at that time were in prison for those crimes. These would mainly be the murders that had occurred earlier and not really were a part of the larger crime spree that they had connected him to. Yang had details that others did not, which solidified that he was the murderer because the information he had only the killer could have known. In fact, Yang knew the exact dates in which he had committed the crimes and was even able to pinpoint the timing of each murder. He sat there and described what he had done to each and every victim, the weapons that he had used to murder them, and how he went about killing them all. Can you fucking imagine being the authorities having to sit there and listen to all of that in detail? I mean, the investigators had to have already seen some crime scene photos, right? Oh, Jesus. Hearing those details from the man who enjoyed killing people would be a fucking nightmare. I cannot imagine. Yang would also be able to tell the authorities where he had discarded clothing and buried weapons, which the police were able to find for even further proof that he was their guy. As far as motive went for Yang, during his confessions, he said he was angry at his girlfriend for breaking up with him, and that he was also extremely angry at society for basically treating him as an outcast for so long, and that he had absolutely no interest in being a part of society. Yang would eventually admit to them that he killed people from pure joy and thrill of the act itself. The authorities believe a large part of his motive was money and sexual from the rapes, and of course because he liked to do it, which is fucking terrifying. When he was asked why he chose the victims he did, he would simply say there wasn't really a reason to them. He just wanted the houses to be rural and isolated, and he would wait until the lights went out to attack. He would tell the authorities that each time he would commit a murder, it would increase his want and need to commit another, saying, quote, "When I killed people, I had a desire. This inspired me to kill more. I don't care whether they deserved to live or not. It is none of my concern. I have no desire to be a part of society. Society is not my concern," end quote. Ugh. That is so creepy and cold. I mean, this fucker killed children like it was nothing. Fuck. While Yang was waiting for trial, doctors would do examinations, of course, and this is when they would realize that Yang had actually had contracted HIV. The authorities assumed that he got it from one of his victims, but it's not known if any of the people who were lucky enough to survive had gotten it from him. A few weeks after Yang was arrested, the media ban was lifted so they could finally spread the news that the monster killer, or Hammerman, as people knew him, was finally caught. Sources would say that before this, though, police themselves would go to the smaller villages and tell them that they didn't need to be afraid anymore because he had been caught. It was said that after his arrest, Yang's father wanted to see his son and talk to him. I guess he wanted to ask his son why he had done the horrific things that he had done. But Yang refused to see him. Then he sent his son some new clothing to the prison for him, and sadly the clothing was returned to Zhongzhuang, and there was apparently a note attached that said Yang's sentence had already been carried out, and that Yang was now deceased. Turns out, in China, like I said, they don't fuck around. On February 1st, 2004, Yang's trial commenced where he would be then sentenced to death. After his sentencing, Yang was said to have waived his right to any appeals. So just 13 days after his trial, he would be put to death with a single gunshot to the head. Yeah, I was like, holy shit, can you imagine if they did that here? Swift justice for real. Before Yang's death, while he was in prison, he had told fellow inmates that killing people was nothing special and was basically just ordinary. And that, my friends, is the story of the monster killer, the Hammerman, the serial killer, Xinhai. Oh man, this guy was an absolutely disgusting human being. I mean, they all are, but someone who was bold enough to just go into a home at night and slaughter anyone he found inside is so awful. During the research of this case, there were so many descriptions of the victims being found, with things being said like there were holes in people's skulls and how their foreheads were caved in or bashed in, and I tried to spare us from a lot of those awful specifics, but I just kept thinking how horrific these bludgeonings were. I feel like you really have to have a hatred for people to do that to them, especially the children. Or you must just really enjoy the action, which means that you are something else. I can't imagine seeing carnage like that and thinking, I want to do that again. Like, what the actual fuck is wrong with you, dude? I'm going to say right now that I am so damn thankful for my anxiety medication, because without it, I don't think I could do these stories. It wasn't that long ago that I couldn't even stand to hear or see anything that had to do with children, like at all. Any kids being killed in any fashion would destroy me, and it would stick with me for days. I think the lack of the ability now for my brain to put these pictures together in my head anymore helped me, because some of these stories are truly awful. It's still shocking to me that there are people out there to this day like this. Yikes. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about this scary-ass serial killer as much as I did, and remember to lock your doors and windows at night. Come on back next Monday when we will cover another case here on the TheKillFile where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help the podcast grow and other true crime lovers to find us. Also, check out the website, TheKillFile.com, where you can suggest a case, find our merch shop, and submit a listener file. Follow The TheKillFile on your favorite social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. Of course, you can always subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on The TheKillFile where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.